Hello, welcome everyone. This is our live YouTube channel, and this video will be for the interpretive content analysis. This is the second kind of content analysis, and I have previously discussed the first kind, which is the basic content analysis, and you can also find the other and the last one, which is the qualitative, through clicking on playlists on our YouTube channel. So welcome everyone, and let's start this video. But before we read this chapter, okay, I'd like to draw your attention to focusing on these important points for the interpretive content analysis. You know, this analysis is used in TV shows and in interviews. It is actually not widely used in social work, okay? It is not used in social work. This is so important to remember. And there's also no reflexivity, okay, that the researcher does not self-reflect himself. He does not reflect himself. And for the type or the research approach, the qualitative is adopted here. Of course, no quantitative here. And for the epistemology, you know, the epistemology here is constructivist or interpretive. So both of them can be found here in the interpretive content analysis. As for the coding or the coding scheme, it is inductive, which means that it is inductively driven by the researcher. It is of course explanatory. This is a research design. Actually, we've got another two, so we have three research designs. As for the statistics, it is not found here, okay? It is used widely. Statistics are used widely in the basic content analysis. We're talking about face validity here. So these are the main points for the interpretive content analysis. Let's start with this PDF for this chapter, but we should focus on the main components of the interpretive content analysis. Here are they. Here they are. You know, the components of interpretive content analysis include the research purposes of content analysis, just like the basic. We will talk about these sections: the target audiences, the epistemological issues, the ethical issues regarding the giving, you know, granting the approval of participants. We will tackle the research designs, the sampling issues and methods, the collecting data and coding methods, data analysis, and the role of researcher reflection. Okay, let's move to the introduction to interpretive content analysis. You know, as the name implies, it's all about explanations. It's all about, interpreting the results. So we're not here presenting the results. We are actually explaining them to the reader, okay? Where can we find such approach? It is actually very famous in psychology here, as it says here. Yet researchers can find many more interpretive content analyses in the larger databases used in psychology, nursing, education, and sociology. However, it's not much used in social work. We should, remember this. No simple dividing line between basic content analysis and interpretive content analysis, but for the basic content analysis, we all know that it uses the inductive approaches and the deductive, okay? You know, some basic content analysis may, tackle some latent material, okay? Okay, here's some information about, the previous one, which is the basic content analysis. The basic content analysis are those that tend toward the use of deductively generated coding categories, use more literal or low inference. We don't have any inferences, actually, very low inferences in basic content analysis. Again, we're talking here about the basic, okay? Here in this paragraph. We've got direct less attention to the contexts of communication and meaning making. We don't focus on meaning making because we don't focus much on the latent meaning, actually. In the basic content analysis, we have quantitative statistical methods, and it draws on the positivist or realist epistemologies. It is considered useful when those researchers summarize or describe data or behavior effectively, or when used to predict or explain relationships. However, today we will talk about the interpretive content analysis. Krippendorf in 2013 on page 24, he defines what we label interpretive content analysis as. So this is the definition of content of the interpretive content analysis as seen by Krippendorf. He says that it's a research technique for making replicable and valid inferences from texts or other meaningful matter to the contexts of their use. Okay, and of course we need many many measures here, okay, or procedures that are used to ensure replicable and valid results, as well as to make claims about context. Here context is very important. Here we are focusing more on the latent meaning, okay? When we talk about interpretive, it is used very much in the war field, okay, in order to highlight the underlying message behind those clear words. Okay, there's always an intended meaning for every word that is said. Okay, so this is the importance of interpretive content analysis. It is used in the intelligences, and it is used widely to learn what is the exact meaning, okay, behind the context. So that's why this drives the importance of context here. Context is very important in this method. Okay, let's go now to the second or to the third page. Here we should understand that we're not counting words here, okay? So this is unlike the basic content analysis. It goes beyond a simple frequency count approach to data analysis, providing data for abductive inferences. Here we've got the abductive inferences from latent content, okay? And he states that interpretive content analysis is especially designed for latent content analysis, in which researchers, okay, go beyond qualifying, here, qualifying the most straightforward denotative elements. So we're not focusing on the denotative elements. We're not focusing on the dictionary meaning. We're focusing on the connotative meanings. Okay, let's go now to this paragraph. It says that Baxter, 1991, states that interpretive content analysis requires different methods from those used in basic content analysis. This is for certain, this is so certain. This is because the act of interpretation potentially makes problematic the reliability with which the coders categorize units and the validity of resulting claims. It is not an easy task, actually. The interpretive content analysis, requires knowledge, experience of the author, and good culture, actually. Okay, complete analysis of symbolic. We're talking about symbolism here. You need to code them, to decode those symbols. Okay, it requires attention to meaning, which may obligate attention to context. As we said, it is important here. This focus on interpretation and meaning brings interpretive content analysis closer to the core techniques of qualitative research, particularly analytic, induction, and abductive inference. Okay, we will study some examples on the interpretive content analysis. Okay, published examples of interpretive content analysis and interpretive content analysis defining primary prevention. Okay, I will leave this and jump to the second example, which is an interpretive content analysis of Reagan. I will talk about Reagan, so I will jump on this and go to this example on interpretive content analysis. Another interpretive content analysis was used to build a model of effective teaching by a person called Reagan. Now, this person or this researcher in 2010, she conducted a study on the effectiveness of teaching, of the teaching process. She used students' online evaluations, okay, of their instructors to identify the attributes of effective teachers with University Institutional Review Board approval. She used 300 randomly selected narrative evaluations from a popular online faculty rating system. Reagan identified from a wide variety of student comments 6 core themes reflecting the attributes of effective teachers. Now, Reagan invented a model called accept. This word consists of 6 letters, okay? Out of those 6 core themes, we took the first letter of each word, which are the themes she used in her study, okay? And she invented this model that is called accept. We will see that later on. Reagan, she identified each of these core themes using their relative frequencies through specific statistical data documenting the frequencies for each theme were not included in the research report. So what we should understand that Reagan started her research by using the basic content analysis, but later on she wanted to interpret her results to the readers and to all the people. That's why she expanded this study in order to show her interpretations for these results, inventing or maybe paving the way into something called interpretive content analysis. Reagan in 2010 on page 91 stated, more than half of the 300 anecdotal comments discuss the presence or absence of the perceptive attribution theme in the classroom. Next, using interpretive content analysis, she extended her thematic analysis, so it was a thematic analysis. It was basic, but then it was converted to this interpretive content analysis by re-articulating and interpreting the more latent content. Then she converted from those manifest content signals into the latent meaning defined by Berg as the symbolism underlying the physically present data. This is, as defined by Berg, this is the definition of the latent content. Okay, what happened later on? The 6 themes were not necessarily always explicitly stated, but both Reagan and her second quoter could clearly infer them from the students' online comments. Okay, and then students' online evaluation comments included awesome teacher, smart, helpful. These are the comments of these students when they wanted to give their opinions regarding their teachers. And Reagan wanted to study the attributes of an effective teacher using those comments of those students. It was an online evaluation for teachers, but she didn't mention anything regarding the ethical issues here. She didn't mention anything about that. Actually, the IRB wasn't there. Okay, the approval for the of the participants. So these were the comments, and these were so clear, so manifest. Yet she found some comments that were not that much clear, so it was considered latent. That's why she intended to explain those latent content. So she interpreted this passage as student is appreciative of the instructor's knowledge and presentation. Okay, when she found that they liked him, they liked his good sense of humor, they described their teacher as smart, as intelligent. Okay, but some other sentences showed their criticism of that teacher. Okay, that's why she wanted to shed light on those words that were considered latent content. Okay, now here another student's evaluation read, look at this one. It reads that, one of the students said, this teacher does not follow curriculum, inconsistent marker, hard to follow in class. She interpreted this evaluation as negative. She interpreted it as student is dissatisfied with the absence of content, inconsistency in marking, and lack of clarity in presenting the content. Note that absence of content is not manifestly stated in this student's evaluation. So she invented it. She didn't invent it, actually. She inferred it from the words of the student. That's why she explained it. So she coded this evaluation with the initial codes inconsistent and unclear. So these were her themes. Initial or preliminary codes are best when kept quite close to the specific content stated in each evaluation. Still, low inference interpretations can focus on the meaning conveyed in the material even though they are not necessarily literal. Okay, so some researchers may interpret sarcastic or ironic comments on the basis of their meaning rather than only their manifest content. Now let's see down there something about Reagan and about the accept model. Let's go now to page number, across here. Let's see this paragraph. Across the 300 evaluations, Reagan 2010 identified 6 overarching themes. So these are the first the initials of these 6 themes used by Reagan. The 6 attributes of effective teachers were that they were articulate, competent, content experts, empowering, perceptive, and trustworthy. As you can see, A, C, E, P, and T. These themes are both descriptive and conceptual in nature, including abstract latent content as well as manifest content. So it didn't only contain manifest but also latent content. As you can see from these initials of these 6 themes, Reagan, after generating these themes from the data, Reagan compared them to the prior research on the attributes of effective teachers. From these codes, Reagan created the accept model of the student discernment of effective teaching characteristics. This model provides a methodology for using informal faculty evaluations to promote excellent teaching practices. It may make faculty evaluations more flexible and ultimately lead to improved teaching and learning. Her study, Reagan, is a very good example on interpretive content analysis. As you can see, she used a random sampling method. Okay, so she used a random sampling methods with her interpretive coding. And this coding, as for coding here, what do you think? Did she use the deductive or the inductive way? Here it says that the coding was therefore both deductive and inductive in design. She did not identify and discuss potentially disconfirming comments in the study. Face validity was sought, and several traditional techniques were used to enhance what? To enhance the reliability of the coding and data analysis. So whenever another researcher intends to conduct the same study, he would have the same results. This is called reliability. Okay, let's move on to the next section here, which is all about an interpretive content analysis of African American pregnancy loss and infant mortality. I'll leave it to you. This is another example for the interpretive content analysis. Okay. We can say, we can read the summary of this third example, which is the last paragraph here of this section. Okay. Here. Okay, let's read this. In summary of this third study, interpretive approaches to content analysis are those that go beyond literal codes. Based on manifest content alone, They draw on researcher interpretations and insights to generate codes and create analytic categories or themes. So it is important to know this. Coding is typically inductive. So the coding is inductive. Tamam? Alright? Drawing on the study data set, on the contexts, on the latent as well as the manifest communication. So here the focus is on the latent, but this doesn't mean that we don't use the manifest. We should use the manifest. We should use both of them. Okay? Now let's go to the second or to the next subject here, which is the research purpose of interpretive content analysis. What do you think why do you think we use the research? Why do you think we use the interpretive content analysis? Is it important to use it? Of course. Interpretive content analysis is so important as it is important to make judgments about the intentions of people, about the needs of people, about their actions. So it is important that because it tells you the exact meanings. Sometimes you are not that experienced to figure out the real meaning of the words you hear. That's why it's important to know what is hidden. Okay? That's why it tells you something about inferences, about the intentions, thoughts, and feelings of people. This will be focused on here through reading this section. Okay? So research purposes of content analysis. Researchers may use interpretive content analysis to describe content and meanings, to summarize large data sets. All those content analysis approaches are used to summarize or to categorize those large data sets. We use this approach also to make inferences about intentions, about the thoughts and feelings based on the speech or other forms of communication. That's why this type of approach is used in TV shows, in interviews. Okay? This type also might assess people's reactions to policies or services in order to identify those that are clear and appealing from those that are not. Okay? So through this interpretive content analysis you can make judgments. This content analysis approach is also used to not to generate theories. We test theories. Okay? We test theories based on the latent meaning, based on the context, based on the connotative meaning. Okay? It is also, or it was used in World War II. Here, as you can see, it is mentioned here. For example, interpretive content analysis was used during World War II to determine the enemy intentions from study of the content of propaganda and known actions. This is according to D. Solapool. One might assume that interpretive approaches to content analysis could be used currently to make inferences about the motives, about the purposes, and actions of terrorist groups also. So it is so important. Okay? So you should depend on both manifest and latent content. Okay? Both manifest and latent content here in this content analysis approach. Okay, let's read this one. Such interpretive content analyses do not rely solely on frequency accounts of words or images, so it is unlike the basic content analysis. Here, researchers require carefully informed, contextualized, and data-grounded inferences about the likely inner thoughts. I'm trying to analyze your inner thoughts here, purposes, your views of others that are not explicitly communicated. Okay, so most research designs here in interpretive are called or are seen as descriptive. It is important to note that they may also be used to make predictions and to test theories. These are the most important purposes for conducting this interpretive content analysis, is to make prediction and to test theories. We're not generating here. We're not, we don't have that much creativity. We're only analyzing the inner thoughts here. Okay, we haven't reached yet to to this innovative level of the qualitative. The qualitative, as we will see in the next video, will be represented in people who are creative, because they are generating new stuff, they are generating new theories, okay, and they're proving them right. That's why it's not easy to do this interpretive content analysis. What do you think about the last one, which is the qualitative? Here, context again is so important. So it is often a crucial factor shaping usefulness of interpretive content analyses. Now let's talk about the target audiences for this content analysis. Who do you think are the people concerned here in our research? Here we're talking about various disciplines. We're talking about linguistics, communications, computer science, many things like religious studies and ethical studies. We should remember that this interpretive content analysis is used to analyze the inner intentions and thoughts and the latent meaning of governments of World War II. We should remember these words, okay? Now let's read something about the target audiences here. Okay, interpretive content analyses are found in the literatures of many disciplines and professions. They are widely used in medicine. We don't have it in social work. We should remember this, okay? They are widely used in medicine, education, marketing, journalism, linguistics, communications, computer science, studies of literature, ethical studies, and religious studies. They are also used by spies, okay? Yeah, and national governments. Why? To assess the intentions of other governments, okay? Audiences for interpretive content analyses include the general public, users of specific services, advocacy groups, service providers. We can also have marketers, program and policy planners, business people, policy makers, legislators. We're talking about politicians here, yeah? Interpretive content analysis may be used to inform, to describe, to evaluate and summarize, as well as provide a basis for advocacy and action. Let's go now to the epistemological foundations of this approach. Epistemology, we have seen at the beginning of the video that the epistemological foundations are either interpretive or constructivist. But the word constructivist is more into the qualitative. Okay, so let's read about those foundations. Here it says that Krippendorf in 2004-2013 implies that a constructivist or interpretivist epistemological foundation may be used in this approach. If basic content analysts view meaning as contained within the words they examine, the meaning of words is self-evident and not subject to interpretation, where in the basic, we're not talking here about interpretive. However, or yet more interpretive content analysts take the position that the researcher's purpose and frame of reference may make an important difference in the understanding of words in context, because this is related to the researcher's experience, to his knowledge. From the epistemological perspective, texts do not simply contain meaning. We're not looking at the manifest meaning, okay? They are instead rendered meaningful by the perspective and understanding of the reader for specific purposes, okay? So readers, you can interpret, you can make meaning of the presented content from different standpoints or from cultural backgrounds. That's why it's not an easy task. It is important to understand it, that sometimes, some things are considered taboos for some societies. However, they are okay with some other societies. That's why people, tend to interpret things differently, because we all think differently. We all have different viewpoints. Okay, let's go now here to George, 1959, 1959 A and B. He has claimed that interpretive content analyses of propaganda during World War II gave important information to Allied commanders. In analyzing speeches by Nazi leaders, interpretive content analysts were able to infer when new weapons were or would be deployed or delayed, and identified changes within the Nazi leadership. So it was important for those soldiers to understand the intended messages of the enemies, right? Okay, so let's go ahead. Here it says that, however, the interpretive content analysts interpreted the same speeches for very different purposes. The researchers sought to infer the likely actions and concerns of the enemy from the content of their propaganda. So that's why they depended on the content, on the context. Such use of propaganda data requires an inferential process that does not involve a literal match with the data. That's why they depended on the content, the context inside. Meaning is not simply contained in words and images, but can be interpreted by others with their own interests or for their own goals. While there is little overt discussion of the epistemology of content analysis in the literature generally, Kippendorf here appears to be taking a constructivist epistemological stance. So it can be either interpretive or constructivist. Okay, critical theory perspectives are rarely found in interpretive content analyses. So we don't have any critical theory here, okay? They are very rare. Okay, let's move on now to the ethical issues. You can say that the ethical issues for all the three types of content analysis are the same. We should have the IRB, okay? Just remember this. Don't conduct your research without the approval of your participants. Okay. Now, let's read this one. Given prior harms to human researcher participants done by well-intended researchers, it is always wise and ethically sound to seek a formal institutional review before undertaking any research involving people. Just remember this. Ethics review regulations in the US allow institutional review boards to determine that studies are exempt from review where risks are no greater than everyday hazards. So, if it is all about everyday practices, there's no kind of harm, that's why it can give you an exemption from review. No need to get in a review. And those boards can allow an expedited review where risks are slight, very slight. Or it can require a full review where risks that are more serious. Very good. Researchers doing any form of content analysis should seek review of their projects. How or by whom? By an authorized ethics review board. Okay, let's move on to the last paragraph here. Of all kinds, yes, of course, whatever the research is, you should always conduct, you should always receive, their approval. Here it says that social work researchers are always devised to seek formal institutional review of any research project involving human participants, either directly or indirectly. Let's go now to this title, which is the research designs. Here we are highlighting the research designs in interpretive content analysis. Okay, as for the research designs, we have three kinds here in interpretive content analysis. The first one is descriptive. The second one, it can be exploratory, where you identify the new perspectives and experiences. And the last one can be predictive. Predictive if you want to predict anything for the future. So you draw on contextual understanding of events, and these designs are rare in social science literature. So let's read this paragraph. It says that most interpretive content analyses are descriptive in design. So most of them are descriptive. You are describing and interpreting at the same time. They are used to describe and summarize the views found in texts or stated by research participants. The publications of Bloom, Reagan, both of these people employ descriptive research designs. They used random samples. Still, interpretive content analysis may be also used as an exploratory. That's okay. If you want to explore too, okay, that's okay. So we have descriptive and exploratory research design, where they identify new views and experiences and needs. Barnes, for example, Barnes' interpretive content analysis blended. He used both exploratory and descriptive design elements. And George here, analysis of Nazi propaganda, shows that interpretive content analysis may also be used how? Predictively. That's why we said that it can be used predictively. Okay? Descriptive designs, however, predominate in this limited literature. Okay, so what predominate? The descriptive designs. Let's go now to the sampling, talk about sampling in interpretive content analysis. Here, sampling is not like the basic content analysis. Here, sampling is only one stage. It is a single stage process. So researchers initially identify a specific set of text or participants, then seek out a subset of this initial sampling frame. Such samples are selected using either probability or purposive sampling techniques. Sampling terminology is fully described in chapter number 2. As you remember, Reagan used a random or sampling. So this is the first thing to know, that we have only single stage process here in interpretive content analysis. Researchers identify a specific set of text or participants, then seek out a subset of this initial sampling frame. Such samples are selected using either a probability or purposive sampling techniques. Okay, let's go now. Here it talks about Reagan and how she used the random sampling technique to identify the evaluations of teachers she would review. Okay, let's go ahead here with the same paragraph. Okay. The technique Reagan used provided an equal chance. We all know that the probability samples are so important that each one each one participating in the population, can have an equal opportunity of being selected in this sample. That's why it is important also to state that we can generalize results here in the probability sampling methods. Okay, so it provided an equal chance of selection for all teachers evaluated in the larger sampling frame. While Reagan notes that her coded themes were determined by the frequency of relevant content, it is not clear that the full study analysis is consistent with quantitative or statistical methods that would allow generalization back to the original population as a whole. This key strength of probability sample does not seem to be used optimally in her result. As for Barnes, in his study, he used a purposive sampling technique. So he was unlike Reagan, who used the random sampling. Barnes used the purposive sampling technique to identify the African American women who participated in her study. The participants included women who had never been pregnant, mothers, and women with pregnancy losses, to provide varied perspectives on the research topic. So here in Barnes' study, interpretive content analysis was used for exploratory and descriptive purposes, with generalization to others left uncertain. Okay, here, let's go to this paragraph. It says that Krippendorf notes that the sampled units in content analysis, such as texts or interviews, are not necessarily independent of each other. This is very important to know. There must be an independence among data. Okay, researchers using interpretive content analyses with probability samples and using statistical analysis methods must take care to review the independence of sampled units. Failing to do so may violate the assumptions for the appropriate use of certain statistical techniques. Okay, so the independence of among samples is very important to be achieved. Okay, so independence of sampled units. Okay, let's move on to this paragraph. It's kind of a sum up here. Qualitative sampling terminology and methods are more fully detailed in chapter 4. Sampling goals and methods appear similar in both interpretive and qualitative content analyses. The terminology, the conceptualization differ. Okay, so we can say that the concept itself and the terminology, the goals and methods, they are similar between the two, but the terminology used and the conceptualization is more fully developed as it relates to qualitative content analysis. Okay, let's go now to another subject here, which is data collection in interpretive content analysis. What about data that is collected here in this approach? As you know, the examples here shown in this approach, data collection in interpretive content analysis may draw on use of a set of existing texts or on collection of new interview data. So that's okay if you want to depend on those already done or already available, or you can use new interview data. Data collection methods must be consistent with the overall purposes of the research project. You must always gather data that is relevant, that is related to your purpose. Both the study sampling plan and data collection methods must be varied enough to include a variety of viewpoints and potential meanings. Why? Because here we're dealing with interpretations, we're dealing with meanings, we're dealing with latent meaning that I can see it this way and you can see it another way. That's why it's important to have varied viewpoints. Collecting relevant, informative, and varied data is central to the content analysis data collection process. So, data must be relevant, must be informative, and must be varied. Okay, and researchers in this approach must apply self-awareness and self-reflection to their work. The validity, credibility, and generalizability or transferability of study findings are shaped by sampling and data collection methods. Let's go to Bloom here. Bloom, in his study, sought to identify the essential features of the concept of prevention. His work offers an excellent and clear working definition, including some description of definitions that were not incorporated. Okay, here at the end, let's read this one. When interpretive content analysts seek to describe the views of large groups of people, seeking out potentially divergent views is important to establishing what? Validity and credibility. I have mentioned that before. It is important to try to provide varied viewpoints, okay? Showing the reader that some variation viewpoints or meanings is present and that some views predominate is vital in any descriptive study. The last thing to mention here is that data collection links sampling and coding in interpretive content analysis. So this was actually entitled in basic content analysis as unitizing data. Okay? Obtaining a range of data and coding it carefully is the first step of the data analysis process in interpretive content analysis. What about coding? Let's see something about coding here in interpretive content analysis. The coding here is inductively done. Okay? We are looking at both manifest and latent content, but the coding is done inductively. Okay? and we can have emergent codes. So while we're doing the analysis job, we can have, you know, something that popped up. Okay, these are called emergent codes. Okay, this depends on what? On the content of the data that you are having. Okay. Okay, is it important to have multiple coders? Yes, they are commonly used, and code lists are developed and refined to ensure what? Reliability and consistency. Okay, we will talk more about coding and developing the coding list. Then we will talk about the context and coding, and after that, data analysis. Okay, so let's start here with the coding. These contexts are often vital to coding latent and symbolic content, as well as to fully understanding and coding the meaning of manifest communications. Here, coding is very important. Everything is very important here. Please focus here with me. Okay, coding in interpretive content analysis, in most of these analyses actually, starts how? Inductively. It starts inductively with the preliminary raw data. So it starts inductively. You depend on the raw data. Such emergent coding contrasts with the priori or deductively generated coding used in many basic content analysis. This distinction between those methods is somewhat flexible. What does this mean? It means that in some studies, both inductively and deductively generated codes are used in combination. So the question is, can I use both deductive and inductive coding, coding systems together? Yes, that's okay. There's no problem. So I can use both in one single study. In interpretive content analyses, those emergent codes are generated on the basis of content of the data and seek to closely reflect its meaning in context. That's why context is important. However, greater latitude is allowed in the coding process for interpretation and the impact of the contexts of communications. As in basic, however, here we're talking about basic, multiple coders are commonly used, and code lists are developed and refined to ensure what? Reliable, consistent coding by all the involved raters. Again, coding here, it is descriptive. What do you mean by descriptive? Researchers identify and tag for future use content of relevance to the study question. Bloom, for example, coded key elements of definitions of prevention. Let's go to Reagan. She coded key elements of what? Of effective teaching as described in student evaluations, which were the online evaluations. Barnes, on the other hand, coded key concerns of African American women regarding infant mortality and related medical care. Okay, can we use connotate? Do we use denotative or connotative categories here? We use connotative categories in the coding process and in the analysis of results. Okay, all this paragraph is important. What do we mean by connotative codes? Connotative codes are those based not on the explicit words, but on the overall or symbolic meaning of phrases or passages. So we're looking at the hidden meaning here with the connotative. With the connotative codes may be obvious to readers, or they may take some explaining by researchers. That's why researchers explain here. They should explain this hidden meaning. Connotative codes should be clear and comprehensible, but they may be assigned on the basis of the researcher's specialized knowledge, experience, sometimes details of a specific context. In such cases, researcher must describe in detail for the reader how and why the connotative codes were assigned. So it's important that I, as a reader, should understand why the researcher used these codes and how. Okay? In published articles, researchers typically provide the readers with examples of the coding process as illustrations of how the coding process was undertaken and justified. Okay, so these challenges, this is actually very hard. This is challenging. So That's, this resembles the grounded theory and ethnography. Glasser notes that connotative coding cannot follow a series of pre-planned, deductively generated coding rules. That's why it depends on the inductive coding lists. He thinks that coders may need considerable training or theoretical sensitivity. That is, not everyone will be able to make expert level inferences with equal skill. Finally, Glaser notes that collaborative approaches to interpretive coding are often more successful than independent judgments. Collaboration among experts improves identification of latent information and ensures that the researcher states the basis or process for making the inference clearly to others. So here there's an indication to the importance of collaboration among coders and researchers. Okay, here it says that all connotative codes ultimately need to be demonstrated as valid and need to be applied reliably by groups of researchers or coders. The last thing to mention here about coding, before developing the coding, okay, it doesn't highlight, okay. Coding in interpretive content analysis is typically researcher generated. That's why the researcher must be experienced and expert. It is clearly linked to specific reported study data. Codes are more often inductively generated than deductively created a priori. Okay, developing the code lists. Okay. Miles, Haberman, and Saldana point out that coding may be directed to several different elements of texts depending on the researcher's purposes. Coding may be descriptive of what? Of the content, of the processes, concepts, emotions, values, and even hypotheses. Okay, Bloom here addresses conceptual content related to aspects of prevention. Okay, we use both manifest and latent. We should remember this. We don't depend on the latent meaning, but we focus on it more. Okay, what do researchers do in order to develop a code list? They review some selected materials and develop a tentative list of topics they find revealing or useful. In this approach, data used to start the coding process may be the first few documents or interviews in the study. The coder's goal is to identify the most revealing, meaningful, or common material in a set of documents. Okay, the last thing to say here on this matter is that on a less well-studied topic, creating codes can only follow collection of preliminary data. In such cases, inductive coding is preferable. So we depend on the inductive coding. Okay, let's move on now to the context and coding, this part. Okay, I have mentioned in the beginning that context is very important here. It plays a good role. Some interpretive content analyses draw heavily on the context of communications. So this talks about the role of contexts. Contexts may be simple, may be local, as noting a sarcastic communication in which the actual meaning is the opposite of what is explicitly stated. Yet contexts may also include the purposes of the communicator or those of the recipient. Communications may be intentionally distorted or shaded to the specific purposes. In interpretive content analyses, researchers look for the many ways in which context may shape meaning making and help to identify and eliminate such processes to their readers. So they want to focus on the meaning making process. Let's go down there. Understanding the communications and views of these women may have limited without attention to context. This is a strength of the interpretive content analysis approach. Okay, when context is included in interpretation, so when you include the context in your interpretations, Researchers should also seek to establish high levels of intercoder reliability. That is, multiple coders must agree that the interpretation is warranted and is based on the available data. In turn, readers must be fully informed of how the researchers understood the impact of context on their coding and analysis. So we've got something called triangulation of sources, and types of evidence are useful ways to establish the validity of researcher interpretations. For instance, as noted earlier, both enemy actions, later enemy documents affirmed the validity of the researcher interpretations and made from the Nazi propaganda during the World War II. Here, what do we mean by the triangulation of sources and types of evidence? These sources are very important to confirm the validity of your research, okay, or the validity of your interpretations, because these interpretation are yours, depending on your understanding of the context and on the latent meaning and also the manifest meaning. So the triangulation of sources here, that we depend on the interview, we depend on the questionnaires, we depend on the observation cards and the observation classes, we depend on more than one source of information, okay? What about data analysis and interpretive content analysis? Here, what we should focus on is that here in interpretive content analysis, we're mainly focusing on the themes. So we don't have anything like concordances, or we don't have any ideas, you know. We are mainly focusing on narratives, on themes. We summarize collected and coded data through descriptive narratives. These narratives are very essential for informing the reader and must be self-aware and self-reflective to avoid what? To avoid bias. Okay. So as for data analysis again here, while coding is the first step in data analysis, formal data summaries complete the process. Narrative summary presentations reduce the data and highlight chosen themes and ideas. They are an effective and efficient means of informing the reader. Researchers, okay, researchers using narrative summaries must be self-aware. So researchers must be what? Self-aware and self-reflective. Why? To avoid selection bias in the narratives they choose to include and exclude. The art of data analysis in interpretive content analysis is to what? Is to summarize. You're summarizing, just like in basic content analysis. You're summarizing the data while not losing the divergent views and nuance. Where context shapes meaning, context must also be fully explicated to the reader. The selection of narrative descriptions requires judgment and care to avoid bias or overemphasis on some themes and meanings. Something about Reagan's study. Reagan used rough statistical estimates of theme frequency. Interpretive content analysis may or may not include descriptive statistics. So you can use statistics and you cannot. That's okay. There's no problem. Most, however, employ what? What do you think? They use it or not? Let's see. Do we use statistics here? It says that, in contrast, use of descriptive descriptive what? Statistics as a method of data analysis and establishing the relative importance of themes is very common. So actually statistics are common here. No, it's common in basic. This is one key difference between the two approaches. Let's go on with Bloom. Bloom summarizes a range of data about the definition of prevention in a conceptual manner. Okay, let's go down there. It's important to know how, how context plays its role. So how context plays its role in shaping meaning, and how it shapes data analysis is a central feature of interpretive content analysis. How researchers understand and analyze latent content is a key issue in interpretive content analysis. Reagan, for example, chose to keep her analysis quite close to the explicit and manifest content in the student evaluation texts that were her data set. Her analysis and data reduction involved what? Grouping coded data in ways that involved some methods, some modest researcher interpretation of shared meaning. Yeah, she highlighted the latent meaning actually. As for Barnes, in her study, she used lengthy quotations to establish the nuance and context of her participants' statements about infant mortality in the African American community. Okay, look at this, the last portion here. Researchers are undertaking interpretive content analyses may analyze and interpret latent content, but they must take care to show their readers how they make meaning of the data. As for reflexivity, it's important to focus on some points here. Interpretive content analysis focuses on objective facts and does not involve formal self-reflection or reflexivity, okay? And researchers use member checks to enhance credibility, where participants review versions of their summarized results. And this aligns with positivist or realist epistemologies. Okay, so this is the last part here. We're talking about the self-reflection of the researcher in interpretive content analysis. Okay, it says here that reflexivity in qualitative research addresses researcher engagement. So his participation, his engagement in explicit self-aware reviews of several kinds. This may range from individual self-awareness and self-reflection to what? To intersubjective or collaborative processes to critical analyses. Okay, here it says that Finlay has identified 5 variants of reflexivity, which are introspection, intersubjective reflection, and mutual collaboration, social critique, and discursive deconstruction. What do you think is the purpose of self-reflection? It is to identify personal biases or views that may affect conceptual, methodological, and analytic decisions made during the project. Identifying such bias allows alterations and methods to address them or account for them in other ways. So here in interpretive content analysis we don't have this, okay? That is, self-reflection is useful when it aids achievement of the overall research objectives. Such personal revelations may address intersubjective issues or more macro-level social critique. Okay, here it says that Reagan states, I was very aware that my role as a researcher could not be separated from my personal experiences as both a long-term adult student and an experienced college teacher. Okay, let's move to the last page of this chapter. Okay, here it says that most interpretive content analyses are realist tales in which the researcher does not engage in much formal self-reflection or reflexivity. Instead, interpretive content analyses emphasize unproblematized, more or less objective facts. So they talk about objective facts. We should remember this. And this actually depends on the chosen epistemologies and limited use of researcher self-reflection or of reflexivity. Okay, that's it for the interpretive content analysis. Thank you so much for watching us, and we'll see you hopefully in the next and the last video, which is about the qualitative content analysis. Thank you again, and goodbye.